In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. Welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is Ken LaRoe, the founder and CEO of Climate First Bank. Ken, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's not every day you get someone from Eustis, Florida on your show.
I bet it's never happened before.
Never happened before. Tell me what your upbringing was like there in Eustis.
Well, I was born here 8 days after my wife was born here in the same hospital. Our dads were both born here and played football together in high school. So when I grew up, it was a very rural, agrarian community and county. Now it's basically a bedroom community to Orlando, and explosive growth and uncontrolled growth and not good growth and all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of actually miss it when the lakes were really clean and full of fish and lots of squirrels to hunt and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely not that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit because I know Eustis is positioned on a few different lakes. Are these saltwater lakes or are they freshwater lakes?
It's all fresh, and the county's called Lake County because there's 1,300 named lakes in the county. But you can actually go into the large chain of lakes and go all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. They connect to the St. Johns River. The St. Johns River comes out in Jacksonville. So you can actually, about 5 miles from my house, get in a lake in a boat and go all the way to the Atlantic.
So when you were growing up, were you always outdoor? Were you always fishing, hunting, doing things like that?
Pretty much. Yes, pretty much. And my family had some small time farmers, and then they had a family machine shop that my great grandfather started. So it was either, messing around outside or messing around in the machine shop.
So when you say bad growth, I know Florida is heavily focused on development. New schools are popping up everywhere. New cities are popping up everywhere. Orlando's, I would consider a new city in the last couple of years, thanks to Disney World. What has that done to the environment as well as the species or just the outdoor lifestyle?
Yes. So Florida, I kind of joke that Florida is a state for developers by developers. And the growth is all very poorly planned. We've had 22 years of Republican control of our legislature and governor's mansion. So all of the environmental standards that were in place have pretty much been gutted or unenforced, one or the other. So if somebody wants to come in and put a high density sprawl development, they pretty much get away with it. And there's no pretense of any environmental protections going on. So it's every nightmare you could think of, water, species, habitat destruction, that sort of thing. Probably the black bear is one of our biggest examples of a species that's really negatively impacted. We have 3 distinct populations of black bears. It's basically the north, central, and south part of the state. And it's starting to, and they roam very large ranges, and it's getting so broken up they can't even roam their normal range, and it's dramatically impacting. And then the Florida panther, which is an endangered species, a dramatically endangered species in crisis. There's so few of them left and so little habitat. They're starting to worry about inbreeding that will ultimately be the demise of the species. So yeah, it's pretty dramatic in Florida.
And now the bears and the panthers, now I'm assuming they, let's think about the food chain, right? Like they're hunting fish or small predators that are being wiped out by lots of development. I want to make the analogy to banks and funding and how that supply chain, that money supply also impacts, people up and down the supply chain. What is a banker's role in terms of preservation, in terms of economic prosperity for all living organizations? Where were you before maybe you came to this enlightenment, and what is driving you now?
Well, it's a really good question, and opens the door for a little bit of background. I started my first bank in '99 with no pretense of anything, values aligned or mission or whatever. Built it up and sold it in 2006, and just blind luck, great timing, all of that good stuff. Got a really high multiple for the bank, and had a non-compete. And my wife and I bought a little mini motorhome, and we circumnavigated the country. And before we left, my brother gave me Yvon Chouinard's autobiography, which is the title of it is "Let My People Go Surfing." And it's a fabulous book. And it was really motivating to me that I needed to do something that did more than just made a bunch of people a bunch of money. I had to do something to give back. And so that led to my last bank, which I started in, we opened in '09, which was First Green Bank. And I had no idea what it meant to be a values-based bank. So the whole time we had the bank, it was a giant learning journey for me and my team, which really, the turning point, I think, was when I was asked to join the Global Alliance for Banking on Values in 2012. And then I was asked to serve on the board in 2014, which I did for 2 years. And when I'm in a room with the CEO of Brock Bank in Bangladesh, that at the time was doing 8,000 microloans a month, it's pretty darn sobering. It's like, oh my God, I'm not doing enough. I'm not worthy to even be here, in this room with these amazing people doing amazing things. I don't think I answered your question, but that's kind of how we got to where we are today. And then I sold First Green in 2018. Got another mini motorhome, circumnavigated the country again, and decided 100 times I was going to do another bank, and 101 times that I wasn't going to do another bank. And then finally my wife said, "You got to do this, or you're driving me crazy, and we're going to have to get a divorce." So that prompted me to, that was enough kick in the butt to make me realize that I definitely did have it in me, and I had to do it. It was a moral imperative. So we filed in October for our charter for Climate First Bank, and we open our doors a week from now, June 1st.
I love it. Well, congratulations. And yeah, that was a kind of a two-part question. I asked you kind of what is the bank's role in this, and then also, kind of why did you get into it? And before I let you finish this next question, I was also reading this crazy book of mine, that kind of came up, and in that book, Yvon Chouinard, a lot of banks turned them down. Who is going to fund this organization who's going to give all their IPs away? Who's going to fund this organization? Who's going to invest loads of money into an organic cotton supply chain? So when it comes to the banker's role in regenerative businesses and companies that want to make a change in the world, how do you see it?
It's super, super important. One of our taglines is that change finance to finance change. And I didn't originate that. I wish I did, but it's very, very true. And that's kind of the premise of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values is finance is extremely important and extremely impactful. And the vast majorities of banks worldwide aren't addressing anything, whether it's Chase being, if I'm not mistaken, the largest financer of dirty energy in the world. So you just have to, we've come to the conclusion that you have to address every single aspect of every single thing you do every day. And then there's been a sea change, as we've all seen, fortunately, in the last 5 years, and for sure in the last couple of years on the ESG front. You can't pick up the Wall Street Journal without seeing an article about how big ESG is getting and how important. But if you go back and look, the abbreviation ESG didn't even enter the common vernacular until like the end of 2017. So this is all new. It's all real. It's all big. It's all, for us, fun. For maybe some other banks or other bankers, it may be frightening. because what does the future hold? I think we are. So back to the question of what should banks or what can banks do? We founded as a Florida Legal Benefits Corporation, and that's got requirements and other requirements that we have to follow. We are also a certified B Labs, B Corp. Right now we're in the provisional stage because you have to actually be open, but they've granted provisional status. We've joined 1% for the Planet already. We hope to participate in the Race to Zero. We're looking at our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We're net zero right now. We'll be net zero the day we open, and plan to stay net zero through a combination of our own power generation and then buying offsets and all of that stuff. So it's like I said, you just have to look at every single thing you do, from your supply chain to your customers to what you do every day.
And what's the business case for this? Obviously, these are all great things, but at the end of the day, you're focused and you have I would assume you have a fiduciary responsibility to, make as much money as possible, and doing it the right way, of course. But like, what is the business case for people listening to this out here, for bankers listening to this out here who have never really heard of these concepts? ESG, like you said, still kind of a new word. What's the business case for investing in organizations with upside, both in the environmental impact as well as financial?
Yeah, I think it's a huge business case, and I outlined it in the business plan that I submitted to the FDIC in the state of Florida. We understand solar financing. We know what everything, most of our folks can look at a house and say, you will need this amount of this many panels on your roof, and can quote the rates of production, the cost savings, everything else. Most bankers don't even know what a KW is. We understand commercial pace. We understand the value in a capital stack. Most bankers don't even know what it is. So I think we've got this huge niche that everybody else doesn't have. They'll come slowly. They'll kicking and screaming, I'm sure. And most of my friends and cohorts that are community bankers are great people, but as we all know, they tend to be very conservative, very hidebound, don't want to change, and quite frankly, a lot of them don't believe in anthropogenic climate change. So you can't just feel like being a member of the Rotary Club is making a difference in your community or in your world. You can't feel like because you bought a pig from a 4-H student at the county fair and got your picture in the paper that's actually doing anything for the community. But at First Green, we not only were as deep values-based as we thought we could be, which proved to be wrong. We could have been much deeper. But we returned financial performance that was in the top 10% of all banks in the state of Florida. And I intend to do that now. And I did not believe in Milton Friedman's shareholder primacy thesis, that it's shareholders that matter more than anything else. I kind of am starting to think he got it right, but for all the wrong reasons. And I have shareholders that are total Trump supporters that do not believe we have a climate crisis. And I've got shareholders that are very strict ESG funds, and I have a responsibility to all of them. And if I can't make a profit that's in the top quartile, nobody's going to take us seriously anyway. So, I mean, to me, making a profit is part of the whole ESG responsibility.
And you found this bank off the backs of one of the 2008 recession. Is that right?
The First Green, I mean, we opened in February of 2009.
Oh, First Green. Okay.
Yeah. And so, we sold First Green in 2018. Okay. So that was a real heartbreaker for me and the community and my coworkers, and a big reason why I started this one. And part of our investment thesis on this one is to not sell, which goes back to the business case, which goes back to investor return. I want to pay dividends with this bank, and then as soon as possible take it public, so we've got liquidity and the ability to get market valuation.
Huh. Well, hold on one sec. Why was it a heartbreaker? I mean, this is keep in mind, Ken, this is something that I was studying in preparation for this. So that makes a lot of sense. This is a different bank. Why was it a heartbreaker to sell that bank?
Well, I mean, to sell, it was built on the traditional Florida bank entrepreneurial model of you. And hopefully you do that all in 5 years. So everybody gets a quick pop and moves on. So we've been at it 8 years. The pressures, when are you going to sell this thing? When are you going to sell this thing? I want my return. And so we ended up selling, and it was a very protracted process that shouldn't probably have been for a whole lot of reasons. And we didn't get the return I felt like we should have gotten or deserved, because our financial performance was phenomenal. And the bank that acquired us said they were going to continue some of our values proposition, and they didn't. So that was a big letdown. And then I have all these wonderful coworkers that are either without a job because a bigger bank doesn't need their position, or they're not feeling fulfilled if they stayed with the acquiring bank. We get so many of our coworkers. We get the most quality applicants for every job opening we have because of our values proposition, and these exquisite millennials that go to work for more than just a paycheck. And I guess that goes back to the business case, Kevin, that you were asking about. We can recruit the absolute most phenomenal people. I've gotten so many shareholders. We're at 35 million something in escrow right now in capital on a minimum 17 million raised. So we more than doubled our minimum. And a lot of these investors are here just because of the values proposition. I'm getting calls and emails and texts every day of people. When can I open my accounts? When can I open my accounts? I believe in what you believe in. Well, those people aren't going to Chase. They're not going to the community bank down the road because they don't live their ethos. So I think we've got a niche. We've got customers that nobody else will get. We've got products and product lines that nobody else has. And I've been able to raise an incredible amount of money in a pandemic that I don't believe I could have done near as well without the values proposition.
So let's elaborate on this a little bit, because I find this so interesting. The values of this organization, what you guys stand for, is definitely attracting not only investors, but good quality workers who are passionate, who are driven. What does that look like when you announce something such as, we want to bank the unbanked? We want to invest in organizations that are making a slight change to provide, let's say, healthier meals or healthier products in their stores, things that aren't damaging the environment. What does that do in terms of attracting stakeholders with aligned values?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is we darn sure better be walking the walk. That's kind of maybe the backside of what you were getting at, is there's a high level of accountability that goes along with this. But I mean, there's another term that's people that care want to know where their money sleeps at night. You know, you want to know where your money sleeps at night. My millennial daughter wants to know where her money sleeps at night. And thank goodness for your generation, you vote with your pocketbook, and you're not going to spend your money where it's doing evil. And that translates also into the employee side. Was that responsive to your question, or did I?
Yeah, it was kind of an open-ended question, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess I was just curious, because banking isn't really like the sexiest position, right? It's not the sexiest job to have in the world. But what I think you're doing here is you're really appealing to the next generation of workers who are proud to work at a bank for kind of what they do. And I was wondering kind of what like the ultimate impact that would have on your engagement, on your productivity, and on your financial performance.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful. I never thought about somebody being proud to work for a bank. And I think that definitely, I see that with my folks. I mean, we probably all wish we could measure. I mean, you can measure productivity on a factory floor, on a production line, making widgets. But how do you measure productivity with a clerical person, other than
And folks, it looks like Ken's just lagged out on us real quick. We're experiencing a few Wi-Fi problems earlier before the show. I apologize. Ken looks like he's okay. Ken's going to wait to reconnect and come back on. But while that's happening, it's very interesting because, I was doing a lot of research prior to this interview about Ken's original bank that he started after the recession in 2008, where he was out competing. There he is. Ken, you're coming back on. I was just giving you a little, just a little touting there, kind of talking about the studying I was doing prior to this interview about your original bank. But I'm going to let you finish this question because this is kind of where you cut out. You were talking about productivity and how you measure that within your own organization. Then you kind of cut out right then and there. So I'll pause and kind of let you continue that.
Sure. So I mean, the issue is, how do you measure productivity? We try in every position. And I think, at least my experience at First Green, is we have very, very productive people and very tuned in, turned on, and engaged people. And we have very high customer service scores. Come to think of it, to close the loop, to go full circle. So what is the result of engaged employees or coworkers? It's happy, engaged customers that really become advocates for the bank. We had customers at First Green, which I'm sure we'll experience even more with Climate First, that they called themselves members of the bank, not customers. Mm. So that's a term that's generally reserved for credit unions, which are member-owned nonprofits. And it's like, oh my God, that's the biggest honor we could have ever gotten. Most bankers disdain credit unions in the fact that they don't pay taxes, but they get to do the same products we do. I don't disdain them. I mean, there's big merits, but I love my customers calling themselves members.
It's pretty powerful. It's interesting to think about a bank, proud to be a part of a bank. Banking with Climate First. It's interesting to think about from someone, let's say an entrepreneur who's starting out. Now, how do you help out entrepreneurs, specifically social entrepreneurs, let's say, who are traditionally maybe going to just family money, trying to do different, let's say, venture capital fundraisers first, and then they kind of go to a bank? What's kind of your philosophy on how you work with entrepreneurs within your community?
Well, that's a great question. And as a commercial bank, really, you can't. We have the time-proven, regulatorily approved bank underwriting standards that have been developing for the last 400 years, and you can't deviate from them, or you will certainly get whatever range of demerits from the regulators that they hand out. So part of my business thesis for this bank is I want to be able to eventually provide everything from angel to exit. I want to provide a much bigger capital stack than traditional. You walk in, you qualify for a bank loan, or you don't. And the first way to start is with government guaranteed lending, the SBA, USDA, Export-Import Bank. those various different sources. I'd like to do a factoring division. And factoring can be very expensive money, but it can also be a great transition. And I want to have, compassionate factoring. I'd like to do an SBIC at some point, which is for second stage companies. So I'm started addressing that, and we're starting to put the pieces in place. It'll take some time to layer them all in, but I think that's the long-term answer to your question. Today, if there's an entrepreneur walking in the door, we can't help them. And that's a huge hurdle, and it breaks my heart.
Right. And that's something you want to change.
Right.
You mentioned that the last bank, it was heartbreaking to sell and then kind of see what happened to it afterward. What's now different about First Climate that you can say right now is not going to happen again? Like, how do you ensure that when you sell, or if you don't sell, that things are going to be different this time around? What are you doing?
Well, a couple things. We just a whole lot of transparency right up front with the shareholders of, do not expect this to sell in 5 years and get your return. This is the model. It's going to be a built to last hold model, go public. Now, once we're public, it's pretty darn difficult to prevent a hostile takeover or something from happening, right? I mean, we see that. We've seen that with some really stellar companies that were B Corps that got taken over by VC firms or funds and then dropped the B Corp status. We're also a legal benefits corporation, which provides a little bit of protections. We're certified B Corp. Just a lot of it is just the executing on the, paying the dividends to pay the investors to wait, and then taking the bank public and providing that element of liquidity and marketability.
And just for people listening out there too, and correct me if I'm wrong, the only way to make my money back is when you sell that organization. So is that why you felt that pressure originally with First Green, such as early close family and friends, things like that were maybe forcing you to sell that bank? Yes.
And I mean, there were options. Of course, we could have tried to turn it into a subchapter S, do a reverse stock split, but that would have been pretty devastating to most of the shareholders. There's no way I was going to do that. We could have tried. We could have taken it public or tried to go public, and that was certainly an option. But the majority of the shareholders didn't want to do that. So it all comes back to what the shareholder expectation is. And we've tried to establish the expectation on the front end with this bank that we're not going to sell. We're going to be built to last.
So what does one have to think about when you tell investors we are going to go public with this climate bank? What do you have to think about way down the line?
Well, I mean, some of the stuff, thinking about down the line, it's all the legalese. What does it take? What's the process? It's more a process related calculus. But what's shocking me every day, and I just think we've got a tiger by the tail in a very good way, is the whole ESG movement. And I think when we're ready to go public, that we're going to be not only accepted with open arms, we're going to be sought out. And investors will be clamoring to get in. That's what I'm feeling right now. And so from a long-term planning perspective does that continue? What does that look like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road?
Ken, do you like the term ESG? You like the term regenerative investing? You like impact investing? Like what are you comfortable with, and how do you see your type of portfolio?
I like ESG. I like kind of the general categorical analysis of it. In the old days, they used to say sustainable. Well, is it sustainable? And then if I were to ask, how's your marriage? And you say, well, it's sustainable. I said, well, I know the name of a good divorce lawyer. It's not it's not a good description, and I'm glad we've kind of gotten away from that. Regenerative is great, but does that encompass everything? Maybe it does. Maybe regenerative governance is, could be a thing. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I just know I don't like sustainable.
Mm. Well, I think you're spot on with investors increasingly looking for organizations that are good for the planet, such as Beyond Meat. And last week's like Oatly, oat milk, that just launched their IPO as well. The price is going up. People want to invest in organizations that aren't going to, have huge environmental costs, because it's a risk. It's a risk for investments nowadays. It's a risk from a legal standpoint as well. But it's still a messy middle. It's still kind of undefined. How do you look at social investments? Let's talk about the S, for instance. What does a social investment mean to you, and how does that look within the organization? Are you looking for specific metrics? Are you looking at the leadership? What does that look like?
That is a fantastic question. So my gig is the environment. It always has been since as far back as I can remember, 11 years old. It was like the environment. Why are they dumping something in that lake or whatever? And I feel like we have an existential crisis with the climate crisis. And my wife's favorite descriptor is because nothing else matters. If we don't address the existential climate crisis, social issues don't matter. Our social issues are greatly exacerbated. One of our board members, Dominic Miardin from Optus Bank in Columbia, South Carolina, is a minority depository institution. It's a Black-owned bank, and they are dealing with financial inclusion, racial equity, all those kind of issues, and it's very hard. And so my philosophy is we try to really get the climate piece figured out. We try to really address the E part of ESG. We don't do any harm on the social side, but tackling low to moderate income banking is a big process, big project. It's very difficult. We tried at First Green, and I mean, we fought with it for 18 months, 24 months, just could never get it off the ground or get it to work. So to me, a social, there's all kinds of social deals we can do, if you will, whether it's banking a nonprofit or doing a loan for housing for veterans. There's a lot of different places we can touch, but to go out and offer a product for the unbanked and underbanked, we are for sure not going to do that, right now.
So let's take that example with hiring or employing veterans. What are you looking for specifically? Is that a byproduct of their organization? Or if they were to remove that from their organization, would they be the same type of company with the same type of competitive advantage? Is there specific little things, values, leadership, models that you're looking for in organizations that kind of fit your bill?
We love B Corps. I mean, that's an easy one. If you've looked at the statistics for B Corps in Florida, we don't hardly have any. It's really, really sad. What's going on in Florida. It's a real difficult thing, Kevin, especially in Central Florida, because we're, my friend Kat Taylor told me that I need to just keep my chin up because we're missionaries in the jungle here in Central Florida. It's a lot easier when you're in San Francisco to do really deep value stuff. So would we bank the guy down the road that's got an auto repair shop that doesn't give a flip about, the climate crisis? Yes. I think we would if we found out that he was improperly disposing of chemicals. It would freak us out. I don't know what you can do once the loan's made or whatever, but, would we bank the young veterinarian who's building herself a new office building, and we say, well, we'd really like you to do LEED certified, and she says no, we'd still do the building for her. But conversely, we have a negative screen. We won't do dirty energy. We won't do extractive industries. We won't do porn, and that's kind of easy to just have a black and white thing. But then there's all kinds of slippery slopes. Like, I know some values-based banks that it's a hard line. They will not do fast food. They won't finance a fast food restaurant. Well, does that mean you're not going to finance a Chipotle, or you're not going to finance an Evos that's serving quality food in a fast food manner? I don't know. There really is a lot of gray areas.
What pushback do you get from other investors or people of equity in the organization? I mean, do they say, like, let's take that Chipotle example. It's like, these are human beings, that just need some funding to get through to the next round during this recession. I mean, are there some like moral challenges that you faced along this journey?
There has, yes. During the capital raise, a whole lot. And then already we're approving loans. And we had one today that we took to the full board because of the slippery slope nature. There's a convenience store. And I did a lot of convenience stores at First Green. We have a huge network of convenience store operators that are our customers in the Indian American community. And this was a store that's owned by 3 millennial Indians. So they're second generation immigrants. And it's a brand new store, purpose built. It's got a restaurant in the store. It's kind of a Wawa, a big multi-pump store. And we told them we don't do convenience stores unless you'll cover it with solar and put an electric vehicle charging station. And these guys said, perfect. We know we're not going to be pumping gas 20 years from now. This is fantastic. This will help with the transition. And we're going, yes, nice. This is exactly what we were wanting to do. And then I had a number of my coworkers say, time out. I don't like this at all. We're financing the last mile of dirty energy. What are we thinking? And we had a really, really robust board discussion about it today. And one of my board members is absolutely adamant that we don't do it. So it's really interesting. I loved it. It's a very stressful thing, this early on, but this early on is when we need to be addressing this stuff.
And how closely do you look into solar, into wind, into alternative energies? For instance, let's just say like wind turbines, for instance. I heard actually they do kill a lot of animals, a lot of birds, things like that. I mean, are those ever discussions that you guys have, or are you just solely focused on alternative renewable energies are good, let's say fossil fuels are bad, and we'll just check the box on that?
Every single thing, like you just said, if we know about it. I mean, there are always the things you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
But if we know and it's brought to our attention, or somebody figures something out, we address it. And I think, I wish naysayers could sit in our board meetings. I wish they could sit in our management meetings and see how absolutely deadly serious we take this stuff. Another perfect example is those stupid window envelopes that you get your bills in, and it's got the plastic panel in it. And it's like, well, that fouls the whole recycle process for paper. And my wife and I cut those plastic things out. So I charged my operations people. I said, we will not send out envelopes with plastic in the windows. And we're finding out we can't control it. There's nothing we can do. The vendor we use runs 30 banks in a day, runs all their stuff, and we're just a little block in their production line. They can't come in and say, okay, we're going to put 1,000 window envelopes without plastic, and they refuse to change their whole production to without plastic. So it's like, it's mind-numbingly little things that you just have to fight and fight and fight and fight.
And I'm thinking about this in terms of like innovation and your own supply chain. When you're faced with that obstacle, how do you have a conversation to make and transition to a more environmentally friendly business model, environmentally friendly supply chain. You mentioned Yvon Chouinard. That was the obstacle. Non-organic, dyes going into the waste streams. Through those conversations, they had to cut down their own or non-organic suppliers. When you're faced with an obstacle like that, what's your approach?
Oh my goodness. I wish it was formulaic. I wish there was something that I could say, okay, I got to plug it in, and then at the end of it, we're going to have an output, because everything is dramatically different. As an example, I was in this whole discussion on the convenience store. I said, because at First Green Bank, we're the first and only bank in the state of Florida that banked the Florida cannabis industry. And, we really went out on a limb to do it. And part of it was that my wife suffered a traumatic brain injury in a bicycle crash, and she had a seizure disorder. And we were able to completely cure the seizures with cannabis. So I had a really, really very strong opinion and very emotive opinion that the cannabis needed to be legalized. We need to bank it. And when it became legalized, I had a really long discussion with my board. One of my board members was a radiation oncologist. He said, this cannabis saves my patients. It cures their nausea, on and on and on. And so we banked the industry. And we, like I said, we were the first and only bank. Well, we would bank the cannabis industry today if we were allowed under the 3-year, startup bank period, which we're not. In a nanosecond, we would bank the cannabis industry, but it is a huge energy hog. It's the worst, most horrid energy hog. They use the most disgusting, horrid chemicals to process it. In the state of Florida, the G part of ESG doesn't even exist. I mean, we got one of the most corrupt states in the country. So if you got a license, you're not checking the G part. So there's nothing on ESG that would warrant us banking the cannabis industry, but we do it all day long because it helps the patient. Right? So every single thing, I think, is a totally separate calculus.
Interesting. So if we can't it's almost impossible to have a business that doesn't have any external costs, environment costs, right? If you can't fully do good, like what is your perspective from a business case? That's what I want to break this down to today. It is a business case. Not only are you helping patients, but there's tremendous upside in the cannabis industry, let's say. What are your thoughts for people listening to this to help them understand that it's not just to do good, but it's also to do a little bit more good than we were doing and also generate profits for the long term?
Well, I tell people I'm a rabid environmentalist, but I'm a rabid capitalist also. And that came to me when I was giving a talk somewhere, and I said, well, I'm a rabid environmentalist, and probably 40% of the room started rolling their eyes and shooting me birds and everything else. And so then I said, well, I'm a rabid capitalist too. And I am. I mean, it's fun. I went to business school because I'm a deal junkie. I love doing deals. I love making money. I don't believe that you have to sacrifice the profit side to do good. I really don't believe that. There are those that do. Yvon Chouinard is in a very unique and fortuitous position that he and his wife own 100% of the company. So they can do whatever they want. And maybe they do sacrifice profit for good because it's their decision. But I have shareholders to report to. I have a fiduciary responsibility. And, quite honestly, I want my 83-year-old dad to get a lot of financial benefit out of his ownership of Climate First Bank. That, again, I don't know if I answered the question, but somebody's saying that they love my new hairdo, but I need to show this. That this is the COVID tail that I've been growing over the last year. So
I love it. Hey, we've been living inside. I shaved this morning. You should have seen me last weekend. I've been growing out the beard, been growing out the hair, man. It's all good when you're indoors. Um, Personal and business life cycles. It's something that I was thinking about when I was watching your interviews, because I was like, oh, interesting. Like there is a parallel between personal life cycles, what people go through, their investment into their organization, their purpose, and how things just change. We're just people. And also how the business changes, how many life cycles it has to go through before it's ready for investment. What would be your advice to entrepreneurs listening to this, to people that are growing their own organizations when it comes to both a personal and business level?
Well, I hate the fact that it's taken 3 iterations for me to get to where I am with Climate First and the realizations of what can actually be done, because it started when I was 39 years old with my first bank. It's very refreshing to me to see a lot of the entrepreneurs today go in and fail in 3 years and they're back at it, and then they succeed, and the success is in a 5-year window. With banking, it's a lot more difficult because of the regulatory constraints. But I guess the main advice is just to remain open-minded and be able to pivot quickly. And I know that's cliche, but I was a Republican from the day I registered at 18 years of age till I was 57 years old. And then I decided, well, the Republican Party certainly doesn't represent me anymore. I burned my voter's card on video and put it on Facebook and became an instant pariah here in Lake County. But people can change, attitudes can change. You just got to keep grinding at it and never give up. Never, ever, ever give up.
Now, has that kind of been your principle, your philosophy throughout business? I mean, I just keep thinking about that scenario where you go circumnavigate. You travel across the United States, in a car. You got this book, and you kind of pick it up on a couple different cues, as we all did during COVID, right? Something changes. What have you learned about business through all of these years of experience that you can rest on? You can go to sleep at night and say, you know what, this is what business is. This is what I believe in, and this is why I do what I do. Well,
again, it's the whole cliche. You can do well by doing good. You can do good by doing well. You don't have to compromise. You don't have to compromise your values ever to succeed at whatever it is. I think that would probably be the biggest word of advice. And then just never, ever, ever give up.
And do you think people have a hard time with that? A hard time with going against their values, a hard time with understanding what their values are? And why don't you think we teach that more?
I do think people have a hard time, especially understanding what their values are or who they are. And I think it's gotten much, much worse with the constant onslaught of malinformation through all the various sources. It's the whole conundrum or the whole disbelief of saying, how does the engineer next door still have Trump signs up in his yard? I mean, these are very intelligent people, but something's going on at a deep cognitive level that I'm not sure that we understand. So to your point, I don't know that people understand who they are or maybe even what they should be.
What type of uncompromising values do you say you have?
To do the right thing. And again, that's a very, very global construct, I think. But it's to do the right thing in everything I do.
Is there any way that you've strengthened that over time? Do you reflect at all? Do you think at all? Are you challenged with different questions? Like, how do you refine and strengthen your uncompromising values?
Yeah, holy smokes. Yeah, I definitely feel like I keep telling myself, why do I have to be 63 years old to get schooled in this stuff? And a lot of it is just pure raw humanness, human communication, and being able to be self-effacing and realize that maybe you're not right. And I dang sure wasn't that person at 40, and I dang sure wasn't that person at 30. And some would say I'm not now, but I do believe I'm getting better and better and better and more self-aware all the time. And maybe if there was one hyphenated word, it's self-aware. Maybe that's the key, is just try to concentrate on self-awareness all the time.
Well, I think you are very self-aware. I think you do have a lot of humility, and obviously you're a big believer in honesty. And I think that's what is real, Ken. So we'll kind of wrap this one up. Is what is your definition of a real leader?
Well, I hadn't thought about that question, and I don't want to be cliche, you know. To me, for me, the definition of me being a real leader is that I will lead the troops into battle. I would not expect them to do something I wouldn't do. I'm going to be right up in the front with them. That would be it.
Ken, simply put, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on this show today. It was very inspiring. I love your story, and I just hope the best for everyone at Climate First Bank. For Ken LaRoe, I'm Kevin Ellers, asking you to go out there, lead your troops in the battle, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.